Hi, and welcome to the second of 4 videos for section 2.7. I told you that this section is about one-to-one functions and inverses. In video 1 we looked at one-to-one functions. Now we're going to look at what's the inverse of a function. So again, let's start with a definition. So let f be a one-to-one function So what do we see here first off, before I write too much more? That if we're going to be doing inverses, we have to have a one-to-one function. So we're going to let f be a one-to-one function with domain A and range B. Then its inverse function and the notation we use for this is, it looks like f to the minus 1 power. But this just means it's the inverse function of f. So when you see f or g to the minus 1 or h to the minus 1, that means it's the inverse function of that base function f. So we have f, it's a one-to-one function, has domain A, range B. So then its inverse function has domain B and range A. Super important part right there. So for this class, for Math 127 if you're going on to 127, for Math 181 if you're going on to Math 181, to any further math class, this is a relationship that will always hold true. If you have a function with domain A, range B, then the inverse function, they just switch. So it has domain B, range A, and is defined by the following. F inverse of y gives me some value x. This implies that f of x gives me, f of x gives me some value y. And this is for any y in my domain B. So, let's look at an example of what this is talking about. So if f of 1 equals 5, f of 3 equals 7, and f of 8 equals negative 10, we want to find the following. We want f inverse of 5. We want f inverse of 7. And we want f inverse of negative 10. So what this is saying then is I have this inverse function. If I plug in 5 into the inverse function, what number do I get? Well, we look up here. And again, based off of this definition, if f of 1 is 5, the inverse function takes us the other way. So f of inverse of 5 would be 1. And so let's look at an example. So we have our function f of x is equal to x to the 3rd power. So f of 2 gives me what? 8, right? So f of 2 is equal to 8. So if I was to find the inverse function, if I want to know what's f inverse of 8, so how do I get from 8 back to the other original value? Well, instead of going up this way and over, I'm now going to go this way over and down to find out what my value of x would have been, and therefore it's 2. And that's all these problems are saying. is that f of 3 is 7, so f inverse of 7 would be 3. And similarly, f of 8 is negative 10, so f inverse of negative 10 gives me 8. So that's, in its most simplistic form, the inverse function. We have an inverse function property. And this says let f be 1-to-1 with domain A and range B then we have f inverse of f of x is equal to x for all x in A. So this is mathematical notation for in the set, I guess, really. So f inverse of f of x is equal to x for all x in the set of A, in the domain A. And similarly, f of f inverse of x also equals x, but now, because we're talking about the inverse function, that domain and range flip. So that's for all x in the set B, in the range B, or in the domain of the inverse function, which would then be the set B. So let's look at an example of how this would apply. We want to show that f of x equals x to the third, which we've just shown was a one-to-one function, and g of x equals x to the 1/3 power are inverses of each other. So if these are the inverses of each other, then f of g of x should just give me x, and g of f of x should also give me just x, based on this inverse property. So let's do the first one, f of g of x. So these are our composite functions. We talked about these in 2.6, I believe it was. So this means f of g of x, which is x to the 1/3 power. So I'm plugging x to the 1/3 into my function here, f, which means that's going to be x to the 1/3 to the 3rd power. So I plug in x to the 1/3 for x, that's to the 3rd power. We know from our exponent rules they multiply, so 3 times a third is 1, so this gives me x. So that's good. The one direction it works. Let's try the other way. Is g of f of x, is this also equal to x? So this is going to be g of x to the 3rd. So if I plug x to the 3rd into my function g, this is going to give me x to the 3rd all raised to the 1/3 power. Again, 3 times a third is 1, so this is also x. So therefore we've shown by the inverse property that x to the 3rd and x to the 1/3 are inverses of each other. So that wraps up video 2. Again, just a short one, giving an introduction to what's an inverse function. Come on back, video 3, we're actually going to we're going to learn how to find the inverse function. If we're given f of x is equal to 1/3, then how can we figure out what its inverse function is? So come on back and we'll look at that.